On February 14, 1943, high above Bougainville in the Solomon Islands, Japanese naval aviators encountered a fighter that would steadily dismantle their dominance of the Pacific skies. At 18,000 feet, a dark blue American aircraft appeared. Its unusual inverted gull wings made it recognizable even from a distance. Suddenly, it began climbing past 20,000 feet, then 22,000, still surging upward with power to spare. The Mitsubishi Zero, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, could only struggle at its ceiling. This was the Vought F4U Corsair, soon nicknamed Whistling Death for the sound produced by its wing root oil coolers during dives. Within only 18 months, this single aircraft type would devastate Japan's elite naval air service, breaking down confidence, tactics, and morale. On that Valentine's Day, it was more than just another dogfight. It marked the beginning of a technological and psychological shift that would turn Japan's most seasoned pilots into men who feared the sight of those inverted gull wings. To understand the shock the Corsair delivered, one must look at the mindset of Japanese naval aviators in early 1943. These men had gone through one of the toughest flight training programs in the world. The Yokorin Naval Aviator Preparatory Course admitted less than 2% of applicants, and the 3-year training process killed more candidates than some American battles. By 1943, the average Japanese carrier pilot logged over 800 flight hours, while combat veterans of the China campaign often had more than 2,000 hours. These same pilots had struck Pearl Harbor, humbled the British at Ceylon, and ruled the skies from Burma to the Gilberts. In 1942, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero achieved an incredible 12-to-1 kill ratio against Allied fighters. With unmatched maneuverability, long range, and superb visibility, the Zero became the perfect tool for their aggressive, skill-based tactics. Japanese doctrine, shaped by 6 years of fighting in China, focused on individual ability and the Bushido spirit, the belief that courage and spiritual strength could overcome material weaknesses. Against Chinese aircraft, British Hurricanes, American P-40s, and F-4F Wildcats, this philosophy had proven right time and time again. So when the Corsair appeared in the Solomon Islands, many assumed it was simply another American brute force design. On February 12, 1943, Marine Fighting Squadron 124, VMF 124, brought 12 F4U Corsairs to Guadalcanal. Their strange design stood out immediately: the large 4-bladed propeller, the long nose stretching ahead of the cockpit, and the unusual gull wings. The first battle came just 2 days later. On February 14th, Corsairs escorted PB-4Y1 Liberators in a strike against Kahili Airfield on Bougainville. The engagement, later remembered as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, was costly for the Allies. 9 aircraft lost for the destruction of just one Zero. But something far more important was revealed. The Corsair could climb above the Zero, a feat no other American fighter had managed. From this height, they attacked in lightning-fast dives, then used raw speed to escape before the Japanese could respond. The traditional turning fights where the Zero excelled were now impossible. Japanese intelligence soon gathered technical data on the new threat, and the numbers were alarming. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine delivered 2,000 horsepower on takeoff, with water injection boosting it to 2,250 in combat. The Zero's Nakajima Sakai 21 engine produced just 1,130 horsepower, barely half as much. Top speed comparisons showed the gap clearly. The Corsair could hit 417 MPS at 19,900 feet, while the Zero Model 52, Japan's latest in 1943, barely managed 351 mph. In dives, the disparity became deadly. Corsairs could push past 500 meters while maintaining control. Zero suffered control problems at 360 mph and risked structural failure beyond 410. Climb performance was equally one-sided. The Corsair could reach 20,000 feet in 7 minutes, climbing at 2,190 feet per minute, or 3,210 with war emergency power. The Zero needed 11 minutes to reach the same height. Above 25,000 feet, the Corsair remained agile, while the Zero became unstable and nearly uncontrollable. The Corsair's service ceiling of 36,900 feet was simply unreachable for Japanese pilots whose planes struggled beyond 33,000 feet. The armament difference was even more crushing. The Corsair carried 6 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns. each firing 850 rounds per minute at a muzzle velocity of 2,140 feet per second. Together they delivered 69 pounds of metal every second. The Zero's two 7mm machine guns and two 20mm cannons put out only 13 pounds per second, and the cannons carried just 60 rounds each, barely 7 seconds of fire. Durability sealed the psychological blow. Corsairs had 155 pounds of armor protecting the cockpit, along with self-sealing fuel tanks and armored oil coolers. Zeros had no such protection. Hits that shredded a Zero often left a Corsair damaged but still flying, returning safely to base riddled with holes. What Japanese pilots first encountered over Bougainville in February 1943 was not just another American fighter, it was the weapon that would overturn their dominance. The Corsair's speed, power, firepower, and survivability combined into an aircraft that the once invincible Zero simply could not match. This ability to survive completely changed the nature of air combat. American pilots could fly boldly, sometimes even recklessly, because they knew their Corsairs could absorb damage and forgive mistakes. Japanese pilots had no such safety net. One error often meant instant death. The Mitsubishi Zero had earned its reputation for agility by being stripped down to the lightest possible form. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Every piece of its structure was cut to the bare minimum. That design gave it unmatched maneuverability, but no protection at all. The Corsair proved something new. American industry had built engines powerful enough to overcome weight. They could add armor, firepower, and protection, and still outperform lighter, unprotected aircraft. The Corsair was an airplane that could survive equipment failures, lucky hits, and pilot errors. Japanese aviators never had those advantages. Rabaul, Japan's heavily fortified stronghold in the Southwest Pacific, became the key battleground where the Corsair systematically destroyed Japanese naval aviation. This was Japan's strongest base outside its home islands, with its elite pilots concentrated to halt the American advance. By October 1943, when Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington and his VMF 214 Black Sheep Squadron arrived with their F4U Corsairs, the psychological balance had already shifted. Japanese airmen were no longer talking about victory. They were talking about survival. On December 17, 1943, Boyington led 31 Corsairs to escort bombers striking Rabaul. The Japanese scrambled 40 Zeros, flown by their best pilots in their newest models, to intercept. But the Corsairs climbed to 25,000 ft, an altitude where Zeros struggled to maneuver. When the Japanese tried to engage, the Americans dove through their formations at nearly 450 mm/h, fired short, devastating bursts, and zoom climbed back to safety. The Zeros could neither follow them up nor outrun them down. By the end of the fight, 11 Japanese aircraft were lost, while only 2 Corsairs were damaged. Beyond statistics, the Corsair inflicted a unique kind of fear. Its distinct sound became a weapon. The wing-mounted air intakes produced a piercing whistle during high-speed dives, earning the plane the nickname Whistling Death. Japanese pilots admitted they began hearing this sound even in their sleep, flinching at any noise that resembled it. The Corsair's look only added to the terror. Its inverted gull wings gave it a predatory outline unlike anything else in the sky. Its massive 13 FT4 and propeller, the largest ever put on a fighter, created an image of raw power. Its dark blue paint made it nearly invisible when diving from the sea sky. American pilots often turned this into psychological warfare, performing dives without firing just to unleash that terrifying whistle over Japanese airfields. Boyington's Black Sheep even painted shark mouths on their aircraft to make them look more menacing. By mid-1943, Japan was facing a grim equation. The Corsair and other new American fighters were eliminating experienced Japanese pilots faster than replacements could be trained. Before the war, Japanese naval aviators trained for 500 to 700 hours before entering combat. But by 1943, shortages of fuel and training aircraft cut this to just 150 hours. By 1945, some new pilots had as little as 40 to 60 hours. Many could barely control their planes, let alone fight Corsairs. Veteran Japanese pilots were forced to fly alongside these inexperienced rookies, watching them die almost instantly while trying to shield them. The traditional system of veterans mentoring newcomers collapsed under the strain of constant losses. Those veterans knew what was coming. In 1943, they warned with chilling accuracy, What would happen when America's carrier forces deployed Corsairs and other new fighters en masse? The prediction came true in June 1944 during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. F-6F Hellcats, using the same engine and similar performance as the Corsair, proved decisive in what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Around 400 to 450 Japanese aircraft were destroyed, while American losses were just 130. Many Japanese pilots were killed before they ever saw their attackers, struck by fighters they couldn't climb to meet or escape in a dive. First-hand accounts from American pilots highlight how overwhelming the Corsair really was. First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VMF 124, who became the first Corsair ace on May 13, 1943, described combat with Zeros as one-sided. Walsh scored 21 victories in 6 months, later saying the Corsair made air combat almost mechanical. Climb above the enemy, dive at high speed, fire, then climb again to safety. It was a cycle the Zero could not stop. Lieutenant Robert Hansen showed just how lethal the Corsair could be. Between January 14th and January 30th, 1944, flying with VMF 215, Hansen destroyed 20 Japanese aircraft in only 17 days. His success was so complete that Japanese formations would scatter the moment they spotted Corsairs closing in. As the war went on, new Corsair models only widened the gap. The F4U 1A added a bubble canopy for better vision, water injection for extra power, and improved armor. The F4U 1D could carry 4,000 lb of bombs, more than some Japanese bombers, yet still outperform every enemy fighter. Japan tried to respond. The Zero Model 52 added armor and fuel protection, but the added weight destroyed its agility without giving true survivability. The new Kawanishi N1K George had promise but was plagued by unreliable engines and complex hydraulics that failed constantly. By 1944, even the cover of night was gone. The specially modified F4U Corsair carried APS-4 radar, allowing 36 of these night fighters to hunt Japanese planes in darkness, the last refuge Japanese pilots thought they had. Being tracked and killed at night broke the last fragments of their confidence. The final proof of defeat was psychological. By late 1944, Japan resorted to kamikaze tactics, sacrificing pilots not because of courage, but because their air force no longer had the skill or equipment to stand against American fighters like the Corsair. The shift from fighting for victory to seeking only an honorable death was the clearest sign of Japan's technological defeat. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, the creator of the kamikaze program, privately admitted the real reason behind the suicide attacks. By late 1944, fighting Corsairs and Hellcats in normal combat had become impossible. The exchange ratio had reached 15-1 in favor of American fighters. Rather than be killed pointlessly, Japanese pilots tried to turn their deaths into purposeful strikes against U.S. ships. Corsair pilots racked up kills at a pace no one in 1942 would have thought possible. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington scored 22 of his 26 victories in Corsairs within just 84 days. These numbers weren't achieved by skill alone. They reflected the overwhelming advantage of the aircraft itself. Japan's best aviators knew the truth. American aces were made by their machines as much as their talent. This was a complete reversal of Japanese fighter doctrine, which always placed the man above the machine. The Corsair symbolized America's industrial strength in its purest form. A total of 12,571 Corsairs were produced during the war, more than Japan built of all fighter types combined between 1942 and 1945. Each aircraft contained 13,000 lb of aluminum, 1,000 lb of steel, 18 miles of electrical wiring, and 2,000 individual parts and instruments. At its heart was the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, 2,800 cubic inches of displacement, 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, supercharged, and engineered with tolerances Japan could not hope to match. Even if captured, Japanese industry lacked the precision to duplicate it. While Japan was running out of trained manpower and sending teenagers with almost no experience into battle, America was mass-producing pilots with the same efficiency it produced planes. The U.S. Navy trained 60,000 pilots during the war, each logging around 600 hours of flying time, including 200 in advanced fighters. They fired more ammunition in practice than many Japanese pilots ever fired in combat. Training also included reviewing gun camera film, studying after-action reports, and constantly refining tactics. By contrast, Japan's training program collapsed under shortages. New pilots entered combat with fewer than 100 hours of total flying, often without ever firing their guns in practice or experiencing high-speed maneuvers. By 1944, the Corsair became even more dangerous with its new role as a fighter bomber. It could carry bombs, rockets, and napalm, giving it the ability to destroy ships, airfields, and infrastructure at will. This flexibility meant the Corsair could appear anywhere, in any role, spreading both fear and confusion across Japanese defenses. Even Japan's most respected ace, Saburo Sakai, who survived the war with 64 victories, admitted that the Corsair revealed the true hopelessness of Japan's situation. In his post-war writings, he explained that it wasn't just one aircraft that crushed Japan, but America's ability to build thousands of such aircraft while Japan struggled to keep older designs flying. Sakai noted that survival against Corsairs required avoiding combat entirely. Pilots dove for the sea, ran for clouds, or turned away rather than fight. This was not cowardice but an acknowledgement of reality. A Zero against a Corsair was a suicide mission. By early 1945, the numbers spoke for themselves. Corsairs claimed 2,040 aerial victories while losing only 189 in dogfights, an 11-3-1 kill ratio. Yet even these statistics underestimate the psychological collapse. Many Japanese planes fled without engaging. Others were destroyed on the ground, and countless pilots refused to take off once Corsairs were reported overhead. The production race was just as one-sided. In 1945 alone, America built 7,129 fighters of all kinds. Japan managed only 104, most already obsolete compared to U.S. designs from 3 years earlier. The Corsair's production line alone outpaced Japan's entire aircraft industry. This dominance shattered long-held Japanese beliefs about warfare. The concept of Yamato Damashi, the spiritual strength of the Japanese warrior, overcoming material weakness, collapsed in the face of overwhelming U.S. technology. The old idea that skill and courage could outweigh equipment was proven meaningless. Even Japan's greatest ace and the best-maintained Zero had no hope against an average American pilot in a Corsair. This realization destroyed the foundation of Japanese military culture. The Battle of Okinawa from April to June 1945 showed the Corsair at the height of its power. Navy and Marine squadrons flew from carriers and captured bases, achieving total air superiority. Corsairs flew more than 15,000 sorties, claimed over 500 aerial victories, and dropped thousands of tons of bombs. Many Japanese pilots sent to fight had fewer than 30 hours of training. For them, battles lasted only seconds. Many never even fired a shot before being destroyed. As Japan braced for an invasion of its home islands, planners faced a nightmare. America was preparing to deploy over 5,000 Corsairs from carriers and captured airfields, while Japan could field perhaps 2,000 flyable aircraft, most outdated and flown by barely trained pilots. Admiral Soemu Toyota, commander of the combined fleet, later admitted that conventional air combat was no longer possible. The only option left was suicide attacks. The Corsair had ended the era of traditional Japanese fighter combat. When the atomic bombs brought the war to an end in August 1945, they prevented the final act, Operation Olympic, the planned invasion of Kyushu. That operation would have unleashed more than 2,000 Corsairs from 48 carriers and multiple captured airstrips. If carried out, it would have sealed the total destruction of Japanese aviation. Japanese pilots who survived the war later admitted they were relieved not to face the final planned battles. It would not have been combat. It would have been extermination. After Japan's surrender, American occupation forces brought Japanese officers to U.S. aircraft factories. At the Vought plant in Connecticut, where Corsairs were still rolling off the line, they saw a scale of production they had never imagined possible. A single American factory was producing more engines than all of Japan combined. Individual U.S. states were producing more aluminum than the entire Japanese empire. For the first time, Japanese naval leaders fully grasped the truth. They had sent their best-trained warriors into battle against an industrial giant, while relying on technology that belonged to an earlier era. The numbers told the story of complete domination. A total of 12,571 Corsairs were built. They scored 2,140 confirmed aerial victories while losing just 189 in air-to-air combat, an 11-3-1 kill ratio. Corsair pilots flew more than 64,000 missions and dropped 15,621 tons of bombs. Against the Zero, the Corsair held every possible advantage. 66 mph faster at top speed, more than 1,000 feet per minute better in climb rate, over 140 mph stronger in diving speed, and nearly 3,900 feet higher in ceiling. Its firepower was staggering, delivering 530% more weight of fire than the Zero. Production numbers highlighted the gap even further. At its peak, Corsair factories produced 418 fighters per month, while Japan managed only 250 fighters of all types. Pilot training told the same story. American aviators averaged 600 hours before combat, while by 1945 many Japanese pilots had as little as 40 to 60 hours. When Japanese engineers studied captured Corsairs after the war, the gap was undeniable. Every system, hydraulics, electronics, metallurgy, even production methods, was far ahead of anything Japan had developed. The Corsair became their template for understanding how far behind they had fallen. The aircraft's influence was seen in every Japanese design built after the war, as their aerospace industry rebuilt on the lessons learned from the very plane that had defeated them. For American pilots, the Corsair brought mixed emotions. Many admitted that by 1945, combat no longer felt like a contest. Against poorly trained teenagers flying outdated aircraft, battles often resembled executions. The Corsair turned air combat into an industrial process. Pilots were no longer knights in the sky. They were skilled operators of machinery that guaranteed victory. Japanese flyers, still clinging to the warrior tradition, were forced to confront the reality that courage and spirit could not stop technology backed by massive production. The Corsair didn't just win battles, it reshaped Japanese society. The utter failure of spiritual strength against advanced machines discredited the militaristic ideology that had led Japan into war. The F4U Corsair taught Japanese pilots a harsh truth every time they took off. Bravery and willpower meant nothing against overwhelming industrial superiority. The story of Japanese pilots facing the Corsair is ultimately the story of modern war itself. In industrial warfare, factories and engineering count more than spirit and tradition. The Corsair didn't simply shoot down Japanese aircraft, it destroyed an entire military philosophy. Each Japanese pilot who survived combat with the Corsair carried away the same message: we cannot stop this. Those individual realizations combined into a collective understanding that went far beyond the battlefield. Just as German leaders realized America's industrial power was unbeatable, Japanese aviators discovered that they had not been fighting just aircraft, but the concentrated strength of an entire civilization, built on production and technology. The F4U Corsair stands as proof of a simple principle. In modern war, technological superiority multiplied by industrial capacity equals victory. For Japanese naval aviation, the Corsair became judge, jury, and executioner. It proved their technology outdated, their tactics obsolete, and their philosophy fatally flawed. The path from early war dominance to late war desperation was marked by encounters with this bent-wing fighter. Each clash stripped away illusions until only one truth remained. Japan had challenged an industrial superpower with warrior spirit and lost completely. Today, restored Corsairs fly in air shows around the world. Their unique whistle still sends chills through those who remember it as the sound of death. But for those who faced it in combat, the Corsair remains more than just an aircraft. It was a teacher of hard lessons, a destroyer of illusions, and undeniable proof that in modern conflict, the nation with the strongest factories will always defeat the nation with the bravest warriors. Japanese pilots feared the F4U Corsair not because they lacked courage, but because they understood reality. They knew they were fighting not just a superior plane, but a civilization with overwhelming industrial power. That fear was not cowardice, it was wisdom. The painful wisdom of realizing too late that everything they believed was wrong, and that their deaths would only prove their enemy's strength. In the end, the Corsair achieved something no propaganda could. It made Japanese pilots afraid to fly, and in that fear lay the seed of transformation. Japan's transition from a militaristic empire to a peaceful industrial nation. A transformation bought with the blood of pilots who discovered too late that courage alone cannot win when your enemy owns the sky.